Yeah, it's important to get the clap before I start. The good thing about starting early, and I'm the first up really in many ways, is that if you don't know what you're talking about, you can get away with it. And then you begin to fall apart. But I might take the escape room as an option out. I'm going to be like a long playing record here. The most misused phrase in the English language is lessons learned. I've been talking ITC for a number of years. Probably some of the faces in the room will remember me. The most misused phrase in the English language is lessons learned, because you don't. Oh, AI does. Machine learning does. You humans don't. We are hopeless at lessons learned. 2007, I'm in the Pentagon with Jim Mattis. At the end of the day, we do the work for the Joe, for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, asked the question by the director of CI, what is the single biggest point of failure for the United States of America? Digital dependence. Like that. 2007. 2016, oh no, watch the cloud. Are we in good shape? Sort of. Sort of. Because it's sort of, I feel like you're being boiled like a frog. Yeah, the trick with the frog is don't put it in boiling water because it jumps out. Put it in cold water and slowly heat it up. Toughen the frog, but you cook it. And so this thing is like sort of just running another year. Well, you know, watch out, you know, AI is getting better, machine learning is getting faster. End of the day, the criminals are now linking up with the national. All of this above just is moving at a speed and in a way which I would suggest you're not. That's how it looks to me. Winston Churchill famously, in his book The Gathering Storm, which is the first of his 6 volumes, which went across his most defining period of his life, which was World War II, having a whole series of failures. You know, he failed at Sandhurst, he failed at school, his father failed him at the end of the day, he got the Telegraph rather than the Times when he went to Afghanistan, got a mention in dispatches, not a Victoria Cross, Gallipoli, went into the trenches, stuck in the back benches, yeah, then got to his proudest time, yeah, when he led Britain, in effect, through that period of time in World War II. But famously, the first theme of that first book, of that which defined his life, and he was lots of things, not necessarily a nice character, not necessarily, in fact, what I call, you know, the most pleasant accomplished, all the above, but he was good with word and pen. His theme to that first book was how the English-speaking people, through their carelessness, unwisdom, and good nature, allowed the wicked to rearm. How the English-speaking people, through their carelessness, unwisdom, and good nature, allowed the wicked to rearm. What's really interesting in that simple 2-line statement, the guilt clearly lies with fascist Germany. The blame lay with us. Through our carelessness, our unwisdom, and our good nature, we allowed the wicked to rearm. We saw what was coming, and we talked about it. We sort of got energized for a moment or two about it. And we just didn't see what had killed 60 million people in 1914, 1918, then took out 80 million people in 1939-45. Devastated Europe, tore a hole through a generation. Yeah, and the blame lay with us. So my theme, therefore, for this sort of introduction is just that. if you turn around and think about it, you think, okay, I'm asked to talk about, 21st century. Here we are in the sort of, 2026 and all that side of life. This century was framed by the last. And the last, for half of its time, nearly 50 years, was torn by war or costed by war. World War I, World War II, and the Cold War, of which we didn't close, but it cost us plenty. And it took us to where we are, in many ways, to this century as it presents itself. Tolstoy, his book is not War or Peace. His book is War and Peace, because that is the natural state of affairs. Now, war, you think, oh, goodness me, here's an old general rabbiting on about war, talking to a whole lot of people that have nothing to do with it, rightly so, keep that way. What's it got to do with us? What's war got to do with you? I said it framed this century in my personal view. Well, Plato's great comment, only the dead have seen the end of war. And then that Roman dude who turned around and said, if you want peace, prepare for war. If you want peace, prepare for war. And what happened when the wall went down in 89 and the Warsaw Pact disappeared off the track in 94? Peace dividend. Whew. Could use money for all sorts of other things. Now, do we want more ships, tanks, planes, trains, and all the rest? Yeah. No. Look what's happening in Ukraine. Understand how we're being attacked, what the nature of this threat is, which is yours, not mine. I'll be dead soon. But the very defense of your companies, everybody that works in them, their mortgages, their children's education, keep ticking the list off. And then the nation itself, and then how it sits into a sort of what I call, the Western way, democracy, sort of order as we know it, although that's in fact what I call, moved in different places now a little bit. The truth now, that sits here in your world, CTOs. How important is the defense of the digital space? It is right up there. So when your boards or your management groups sit and they give it, well, money's a bit tight this year or whatever the case may be, yeah? Stiffen the sinews, summon up thy blood, disguise fair nature as all the rest of it. Yeah? So you have to make sure they understand what is happening, because at the moment, if you ask me personally, the answer is we have seen what's coming and it's accelerating away from us. Yeah, we're sort of doing our bit. The sort of blame bar is sort of okay, but we're not keeping up with what is out there and what is happening. So is 2026 going to be more of the same? World War I, World War II, Cold War sort of stuff? Absolutely not. Because it's changed. Sun Tzu, that Chinese general, famously once said, he used some other terms, like water flows to the low ground, all that stuff, which is pretty obvious. Famously said, if one party is at war with another and that party does not know it's at war, the party that is at war and knows it has the advantage and normally wins. Now, you might think that's pretty obvious. How is it possible that one party does not know it's at war? Because it doesn't look like D-Day. It doesn't look like shock and awe. It doesn't even have a tank or an F-35 or a Type 45 or whatever the case may be in the picture set. Our digital space is exposed, whether it's in the NHS, whether it's in your company, whether it's in the cloud, whatever the case may be, the very things that in fact allow us to run day on day, being undone. Yeah? You can't defend it with a tank. Though we need some of that stuff, don't get me wrong. But understand the breadth of this attack space that in fact is now out there and absolutely relevant to you. And we're not returning to a Cold War. The Cold War was really simple. NATO was a monolithic, huge, great, big piece of military machinery sitting on one side of the inner German border, and on the other side was the Warsaw Pact. You could measure it, you could give it credibility, you could work out, in fact, how effective it might be, how far it would go, all that side of life, yeah? That was the Cold War. We're not in a Cold War. There is no Warsaw Pact that we can see, that's in plain sight. Oh, hang on, that's not true. What was Arno just talking about? What do you see every day? You see constant, clever, thoughtful, determined, persistent attacks against the soul of your companies every single day. So the Cold War isn't here. It's a different framework. And what does that framework look like? Well, I think you have to turn back to the sort of founding fathers of game theory. Neumann in the 30s, Nash, oh, don't forget Nash put together the old MAD theory, which held deterrence during the Cold War, hold together, Beautiful Minds, that film and all the rest. But it's Thomas Schelling you need to turn to. Schelling's the boy who listened to the Canadian Prime Minister's speech at Davos. Yeah? If you haven't, it's worth listening to. Because he talks about compliance. Schelling, in his book, written in 1966, I think, called Influence of Arms and Something Else. Two big parts of that is dynamic instability and not the management of risk, but the manipulation of risk. Yeah? But his overwhelming theme was one not of compliance, but the theme of compellence. And war is nothing more than me compelling you to do as I wish. That's it. Forget the tanks, forget the fighting, forget the sort of all those bits and pieces. In its really basic, simple form, it's about me compelling you to do something you would otherwise not, and then being compliant in doing that. That, ladies and gentlemen, is war. So you think, right, well, that's an interesting sort of what I call aside from an old bloke. It doesn't sound like war as I know it. Oh, it's war as I know it, in all its shades, plus all the dirty stuff. But this is really, really important. Because my simple point to you today is this. You are, whether you like it or not, whether you want to admit it or not, from where I sit, we are clearly at war. And so will somebody in 10, 20, 30 years' time write a theme which says exactly the same as Churchill which is how we, the English-speaking people, through our carelessness, unwisdom, and good nature, all which are credible and very attractive values, characteristics, allowed madness to take over. So this here doesn't feel like it really. It's not like sort of, in effect, sitting around the sort of map room before we went off and sort of rolled into Dunkirk on the 5th of June, 1944. Doesn't feel like, in fact, we crossed the border going to Kuwait, 2003, 1990, call it what you will. But trust me, everything I look at, and the ability of the criminal, of the rogue nations and those nations who are aggressively and single-minded in their approach, is to have you, compel you to their will and change our way of life. And the most delicate flower, that central theme, which everything hangs off, is the bloody digital space we live in. Break it, disconnect it, whether it's power, whether it's information, whether it's the sort of what I call, face, fate, all of the above. The blood data in the NHS. And society just folds. Now, I'm not here to sort of blow sunshine and sort of give it the old, hey, you're all doing really well, well done. Like I said, I'm an old bloke. I don't give a rat's ass. But I can see in plain sight the nature of the threats that we face, which you own. And I cannot overemphasize the point that from where I'm sitting and looking at it, we're losing and we don't need to. We don't have to. My experience of working against others on the other side is invariably, they're determined, they're committed, they're all this sort of stuff, but they're not the sharpest knives in the drawer when you put it all together. If we can get our collective game together, we can absolutely, whether it's criminal, whether it's rogue state, whether it's very aggressive competitive state, whatever it may be, we can absolutely hold them in check. But the fact you've got, a comment as Arno made, 2016, it's really simple, and we haven't sorted it 10 years on, doesn't fill me full of confidence that we're in good shape. Now, we've got a couple of minutes at the end before, so I'll take any questions on anything. We okay?
Yeah,
What do you want?
for time. Got a couple of minutes of questions and answers, if there's anybody in the room that'd like to. Otherwise, if
Go
you're
on.
incredibly shy, you can wait until the networking break. And
I'll be hanging around for the day anyway, but the answer is that I just can't overemphasize the point I made. And this is not me being sort of, performing for the crowd and doing what Arno wanted or whatever the case may be. It's genuinely recognizing what I see as a clear and present danger. Lady, sorry.
For everyone in this room, is part of the answer scaling? What's the best next step for this community here?
Right, great question. The answer, leadership is simply this: message, messenger, audience. Message, messenger, audience. So if you identify your CEO or your board or your senior management as the target, you work out very accurately what message they need to receive. Not just a general thing, but very specific to their needs. And then you find the right messenger, which probably isn't you, to deliver that message, and in a format that will be taken. And it could be really short, it could be really long, but the truth is, you have to, it's no use just saying, hitting the, banging on the door, let me in, let me in. You've got to listen to me. By design, you have to identify your target, whether it's a CEO, whatever it may be within your company. And then you have to apportion, in fact, and that's where, the system, AI and all this can help, ChatGPT-5 can help you enormously in providing you, in effect, with that backdrop of data, which you can synthesize down into a digestible, simple message, which says, if we don't do this, Kodak, if we don't go to digital film, you're doomed. I guarantee they never had that conversation. It was lots of all wrapped up, we're doing this, and it's this and that and all the rest, yeah? Nokia, telephone, keep ticking the list off. But you have to get the message. And whatever it takes is what it takes. So that's really not helpful, but it sort of bangs it straight back in your court. One more question we've probably got time for. Anybody? Go on.
It's not really cyber related, but it's sort of is. Last year, I remember you spoke and you commented that, I think, without wanting to put words in your mouth, you weren't particularly optimistic about the Ukraine-Russia situation going into the start of the year. I'm just interested to see what your point of view about what that conflict is today, what it could look like this year, and how that could potentially impact what we do on a day-to-day basis.
It will impact, because the answer is that Russia's heavily engaged and determined to it. Russia happens to be one of those nation states that, in fact, probably fits in the rogue status and is currently through St. Petersburg and all the rest here, in effect, causing quite a lot of the cyber damage that we're seeing out there as it stands here. So, in fact, having them engaged in something is important. Does Ukraine matter? Yes, it does. Can the Ukrainians take back the 20% of the country they've lost? Probably not. Can Russia take the other 80% of Ukraine? Probably not. One thing about soldiers is we're quite stoic, stoicism, that old sort of philosophy which turns around and says, accept what you cannot change and change what you can. You just bottom things into as far as you can a simple placement. So if that's the state of affairs, and you turn around and say, right, the 4 provinces you accept, in effect, are, for the time being, a bit like East Germany. We never intended for the line to be drawn at the end of World War II where it was. Yalta described a very different line and a very different arrangement. But the Russians came down to a point where, in fact, we couldn't stop them, and they established that, and therefore East Germany became part of theirs. But there was always the language that said at some point in time it would come back. In 1989, it did come back. So in many ways, I sense it's important that, therefore, in fact, we continue to recognize that what happened in Ukraine was right out of order. We also continue to recognize that for this time being, the coalition, the willing, the sort of what I call the money, the sort of what I call the determination, all that side of life. Yeah, look, I listen to what people say in this life. I judge them by what they do. A lot of good stuff's been happening. A lot of good work was done here. Were we a full court press on Ukraine? No, we weren't. But the truth of the matter is, therefore, recognize how we can help Ukraine make sure the United States of America is involved in whatever peace arrangement comes up, because Russia respects the United States. I wouldn't suggest at the moment in time that it has a high respect for NATO or for Europe. Europe needs to be involved. NATO probably needs to be involved because it's not going anywhere. But the truth is, we're at a point in time where an impasse probably is for the next and immediate foreseeable future. Otherwise, you're going through a sort of 1916, 1917, not a 1918 outcome. And therefore, in fact, at some bloody cost, tragic cost, as it may seem. So finding a point which in fact stabilizes where Ukraine is now, but Ukraine's important, and Ukraine's important in so much as they are carrying the blood and the effort of, in fact, what I call holding back what was an outrageous act on the part of Russia. But we saw that coming too, didn't we? 2008, 2014, we did lots of this, didn't do much. But understand, because I'm not entirely, goes back to this blame and guilt point. James Baker sat opposite Mikhail Gorbachev in 1990, and he said, not 1 inch further eastward. Think where Europe and think where NATO had got to by 2008. If I was a Russian, I'd be a bit pissed at that. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Sir Graeme.